The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Planted with Sarah Pion. I'm Sarah Pion, your host, and today we have Kema Ogden, who is the co-owner of Top Notch, the health center in Las Vegas. Las Vegas? Yes, Las Vegas. I'm going all over the place today. And one of the amazing things is that she is Nevada's first African-American woman dispensary owner. And she does a lot around policy and just getting really active with making cannabis exactly what it should be, which is equal opportunity for everybody, talking about people who have been impacted on the war on drugs and creating equity. I'm just really excited, Kema, to have you on the show because it's all hands on deck to create a healthier cannabis industry and to make it what it should be. Access for everybody.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'll start with a question that I ask all my guests. What was your first cannabis experience?
Well, I'm gonna be honest. I really didn't partake in cannabis. I wasn't, I was occasional here or there, like most people, you go to a little social gathering, and you partake here or there. Ironically, my dad, when I was younger, he was a drug and alcohol counselor. He no longer does that but he was. And so I grew up really just anti-drugs, kind of misled with the information at that time, like most people were. They were taught back then that cannabis was a gateway drug. And so I really just stayed away from all things for the most part. It wasn't until I became a patient myself or started, really looking into cannabis as a plant and what it does to help people. When I had family members that had cancer and, just different family members with extreme pain from different, for different reasons. And I started really looking into it on an educational side and just learning about it. And then I became a patient myself, using edibles to help me sleep and things like that. And it changed my life once I learned what it can do and then tried it and it helped me. So that's really how I kind of came into it. But so I'm sorry if I'm not answering your question, but I didn't really have like just this one experience where, I started becoming a user of the plant, in a traditional sense,
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great answer. We all come to it in our own way. And even, I've interviewed people on the podcast. Like it was in February, I had the former head of the RNC, Michael Steele, on the podcast. And he was talking about how he doesn't use it at all, but he understands because of the impact that it has on his friends and family, especially medicinally, why we need to work so hard to create policy to make it available to everyone. But then isn't it amazing how using it yourself when you need it as a patient really changes the way that you look at it and just, some of the things that come out of it that you wouldn't get from traditional pharmaceuticals?
Oh, 100%. Like I said, it totally changed everything for me. Being someone as an entrepreneur, having several companies and a lot of responsibility, we tend to wear stress differently. And I had no idea that this is a level of anxiety, not sleeping at night, constantly thinking about work, not being able to shut your mind down and relax and things like that. And I went like 2 weeks without really sleeping. And then I started, and then obviously, I've already done research. I started learning about the industry, I got in the industry, and then of course I had access to these products. And I then started testing different tinctures and edibles at night and things like that. And it just changed everything for me. and I knew then as well, I already knew what it did for other people, but yes, you're right. Once it affects you personally, I fight for it hard. I know what it does for people. It really helped me. And I thank God for it. So,
yeah, I hear that. I hear that. When I was younger, I used it, I guess, I'm one of those people that's like, is there recreational use? Because as human beings, we're constantly striving towards homeostasis. So it feels like most of the time when people are using cannabis, at least in a way that's, you know, that works for them, that actually helps them thrive, is actually very medicinal in its use. But I didn't really get it till I had cancer in my late 30s. And I used it then. And I was like, oh, now I get it. Okay. Before I was using it just to chill out. And now I'm using it for all these other things. And then when you kind of go down, that rabbit hole, and you realize there are all these different ways to use it for all these different times or needs, and it's just way more than we ever thought about it. Like back in the day when I'd have that friend that would show up with a few bags of buds, didn't know exactly what they were, but would be like, well, smell it. I know the name of it. I don't know what it does. See what you like.
right.
That didn't always turn out well.
No, no, I'm just glad that, I was able to kind of turn from the negative connotation that they put on cannabis when it, the gateway drug, all those things, that I was told and taught, and turn that around. And then my father, who, like I said, when he came from that old school training, it turned him around. When it started turning people around that were, really led in the wrong direction with the wrong information early on, I just knew then, I'm like, this is the right industry for me. This is the right thing to do, is to push this for people and advocate for people. I knew I was on the right path. So it's just great to have that change over, because I was on the whole other side of this. And if I can turn myself around and people around me that kind of were in that same space, because the science behind it and what it actually does to help people, is even more reason to fight for it.
Yeah, for sure. What did it take to change your dad's mind, and how did he feel about you getting into the industry?
It's funny because when I started looking into the industry, I started kind of dabbling and trying to get into it. I was really afraid to tell him. I was like, oh God, he's going to think, because at that time I was one of the first. And it was really still, I'm talking about 2014, when cannabis, I think at that time, we were like the 8th state, to go online. And still people, there's no information out there. It's still looked at and frowned upon. A lot of people didn't want to touch the plant because of the federal status of it and all of that. And so you're still dealing with a lot of negativity at that time. And so I was afraid to tell him this. I was real nervous about it. And little did I know he was doing his own research and paying attention. So I just ran it past him one day. I was like, hey, so, hey, Dad, how's it going? What do you think about this industry? And, and he was like, man, I wish I could get into that. It really looks like it helps people. It's different. And I was like, wow, that was a great relief. I knew that, he was paying attention. And then ever since then, I started educating him more and more, just like I was doing myself. And now we are complete advocates for it. And my dad was a recovering addict, which is why he went into counseling and changed his life and turned it around. But, those things are deeply embedded, like it's a gateway drug, all of that. So for him to make that turn and really advocate for it, for people to be able to use it, it really inspired me to keep pushing, so that was my experience with that.
Yeah, well, as a professional in that field, I'm wondering if he's looking at it from like a harm reduction standpoint, like how many times like people who have had bad relationships with other substances have actually been able to use cannabis to ease a transition back into a more balanced life.
Right. Well, yeah. Now there's studies that show it's a exit drug.
Yeah.
And so people use it to wing off, and there's clinics that pop up just for that. And so, no, it's amazing, like I said, and it's great that when people, especially the older generation, and I'm not so young myself, but the older generation, the reefer madness generation, like they can turn and learn and be open and start accepting the real facts. That's even more the reason, like I said, to keep fighting, that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's one thing that I've noticed with seniors and cannabis, especially, like, as we get older. It's like a dear friend of mine always says, it's, getting older isn't for the weak, because we have all sorts of things going on. But, one thing that I noticed talking to people that were of a certain age, when they would start working with cannabis to help with symptom management and things, the aches and pains and things that we start to encounter more and more as we get older, was that they were really upset that the stigma kept them from something that was actually giving them relief, especially for things like neuropathy, because you've got gabapentin and all these things that work for some people. Like I have peripheral neuropathy left over from chemo, and gabapentin just makes me a bitch. It doesn't work.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But using something like a 1-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC really, helps me. It doesn't get rid of the numbness, but it gets rid of the burning and the pain. And I had a woman who was a senior come in with her son, and her doctor had told her to come in, and she was really, not into it, and she didn't want to get high. And I ended up sending her home with an 18-to-1, baby steps. And I had told her, you might find that it helps you with your anxiety as well. And she's like, I'm not anxious. And how we know our parents sometimes better than they know themselves. And her son's looking at her and saying, oh, yeah, you got anxiety. And then she calls me several days later and is like, there's my girl. And I was like, wow, what's changed? And she's like, for the first time, I'm not having issues with my neuropathy after, all those years after breast cancer treatment. And I found out that I am a little anxious. Kind of like what you were mentioning, that you don't realize what you're holding in your body. And I
had no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, be honest with you. And it's funny because I've been fighting and these, doing business for a long time. And, it's funny because someone's like, oh, you're probably just stressed, you're probably anxiety. I'm like, I don't have anxiety. I was like, I take on Decepticons every day, all the time. Like, I don't stress like that. Like, what are you talking about? No. And sure enough, I took a little bit of that, a little CBD and THC, and slept like a baby. I'm like, damn, I guess I was. But like you said, you just wear it different. You don't know, you don't realize it, especially when you're used to being so strong and tough.
Yeah.
And handling so much weight on your shoulders, and you handle it. You've handled it for years, and then suddenly, you realize, like, man, I guess that is a level of anxiety I never would have thought. And then we also don't want to accept that we can have a weakness, when we're so used to being tough and strong and fighting and going through, and you have to be like that in this industry, in the industries I've been in prior. You have to be tough. You have to be all of those things. And so it kind of messes with you, like, oh, well, damn, I guess I'm not as tough, but you are. You just, sometimes you need a little bit of help. Sometimes you need some medication. Sometimes, and what better than something that's natural and that's not going to hurt your body.
Right.
And so all day long, I'll advocate for it, for people, for what it does. I just know. Yeah. So definitely can relate to that.
Well, and I think too, as women, it's like we navigate the world, especially those of us who are, really getting things done. It's like we feel like we can't show that weakness, and you just kind of gird your loins and you kind of lose touch with what's going on with your body, because you're like, the show must go on. Let's get it done.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
When did you get into the industry, and what was it that inspired you to do it?
Well, at the time I owned a gym, so I was always into health and wellness. I had 2007, 2008 area time frame. I opened a gym. I also started a nonprofit with health and wellness programs for underserved populations. So I would bring people into the gym and do free programs for them as well. And part of that was education. And, I always had this mantra, like healthy body, healthy mind. I knew it was a full circle. And, when cannabis started coming up, once again, I had family members that had cancer, dealt with extreme health conditions, and cannabis helped them. And so I started looking into it and researching it. And I didn't even, to be honest, I had no idea that it was coming to Nevada. I didn't know what was happening in that sense. Mm-hmm. I just knew that this helped people, and I wanted to learn more about it. And I started to do a lot of research, and then I realized, they're coming, this is coming online here. And that's when I dug deeper. And it was just a fit. It was a natural transition to what I was already doing, what I was already passionate about, and exercise and all that. It's all holistic care. Mm-hmm. So I knew that this was another level of holistic care that needed to be kind of an option for people, especially if you have passion and you care about the community as a whole. So it was just a no-brainer for me. And then on a business sense, I also, was familiar with a membership, because at that time, it was medical, and the structure that they wanted in that industry was for medical was like, membership type, residual income, like people constantly coming back, like, the system was familiar to me with a gym. I felt like it was very similar, in that sense. So it was just, a no-brainer, putting all the pieces together, knowing that this is what fits. And that's how I started getting into it.
That's awesome. I really appreciate your holistic approach, because not everybody looks at it that way. There's a lot of people who approach it from a formula retail perspective, which doesn't really serve the people and create free access, because we have to have these deeper discussions about, what's going on, and have, people working with us that are educated enough to, create the proper messaging so that people can figure out what works well for them.
No, absolutely. I'm all for it. I still advocate for patients. I think it's very important to always keep it in mind and educate people that this is medical. I don't care if you are using it recreationally. You're using it recreationally for something that probably helps you, like to relax or to unwind or whatever that you might think is minimal, but it still is medical. And if we keep that in our mind, and look at and approach this plant as, hey, it really is medical, whether you use it that way or not. We're all patients. I think that it really helps stay focused on the overall goal of what this does.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it was fascinating watching what was going on in Nevada. Actually, in 2014, I met with Dina Titus to give her an educational walkthrough here in California about like what people are using and what they're using it for. And I remember pulling out the jars of flowers and watching her eyes.
Yeah, because, I can only imagine.
And I was like, take all this good information back with you, get it going. But just like the amazing strides that Vegas and Nevada has had in cannabis, and it'll be really interesting to see, like, the thing that fascinates me the most is, when the casinos start to embrace it more. I'm wondering what that's going to look like, or if that's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know. They're sticking to their guns right now. I think maybe eventually when the lounges roll out and they give it a couple of years to see how they may be losing money. That's the biggest thing, losing money. They just don't want to lose any money. They don't want to lose, potential gamblers and people partaking in their entertainment and restaurants and all that stuff. So once that starts happening, I think they'll start looking at it. But until then, they're fighting against it still, not being on the strip and things like that. So it will be interesting. I think when it federally changes as well, then they'll maybe take a different approach.
Yeah. That's just an interesting one to watch. that will be like where we're really getting into the land of normalization, when we have big companies like that saying, maybe having like a smoking area, or like what we're seeing in like in Arizona, where they're starting to have hotels that are catering to that, which I think is super cool, because, nobody likes to have to take a walk around a block in a place that they're not familiar with to be able to have a quick puff if that's what they do to use their cannabis. When you have been, you've seen a lot and you've been in this for a minute, what have been some of the significant challenges that you've encountered?
The challenges in business, you're in operations kind of thing, or just getting in the industry?
All of it, really. Whatever you want to talk about, because it's all good.
Yeah, because there's challenges on every level. And they're challenges that you would never experience in any other industry on every level. So I can talk for days on this topic, but
maybe what are some of your favorite problems?
I think, one, of course, getting in the industry is extremely challenging. What it takes and what you need to have. So that's why, it's important to kind of have a lot of those discussions on barrier to entry, and how we can, make that not an issue for people who deserve to be in the industry, or at least an option to try to have a business in the industry, and not just owning cannabis dispensaries or cultivations, but other areas of interest in this industry. I think that, I think the barrier to entry is a big obstacle for people. It was for me even, and I checked all the boxes, and still, you have to have a sprinkle of luck, and, it's like this big pot of formula, that it's very difficult, but that was a surprising wake-up call right there, just trying to get in, how much money it actually takes, and things you don't expect. They tell you, if you are trying to get into a business, to have, double the amount of money you think it costs. But in this industry, it's like, 5 times that, because you'll deal with legal fees and consultant fees, or application stuff, or rent that you're not even in a building for, all these different components of being of just applying for this, that the expenses are unreal. And then once you get it, let's say you do get in the industry and you get a license, and then there's lawsuits, you have to sit on it, and sit on your lease, and sit on expenses, and constantly pay attorneys to get updates, and you might even have to enter a fight yourself because of it. So there's a lot of that is, people don't have any idea that that's a part of it. You think you just can get in a business and that should be it, but it really isn't. So that part was very surprising. That was one of the biggest challenges I had, trying to get in, is really just circling around a lot of those things you don't even know of or expect. And then once you're in, the compliance issues, all the regulations and things. And as you know, Nevada, they did a great job, rolling this out. But as far as setting a structure in place and things like that, but we are super regulated. That's, one of the reasons why a lot of states came here is like, let's look at Nevada and see how they did this. But we're so regulated, it's hard to make money in this industry when you have all these regulations, and then of course the obstacles of all the taxes and not being federally legalized. So, you have more, you can't write off expenses. Yeah. So all of those things are obstacles, and it's different. Like I said, there's different times for all these barriers. There's different times for all these challenges, from the beginning all the way through. You just have to me, I think, to encourage your listeners, just make sure you're really educated, you have a really great team around you, you have a great team of people you work with, and have plenty of resources, because you're going to need it, depending on what area you're trying to get into. So, that's pretty much kind of everything as a whole in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's a challenge. People don't understand like what people take on when they get into it. And I mean, quite honestly, a lot of people end up not being able to do it at all, and they got financially wiped out because it is kind of like a doggy paddle where you're shedding money while you're waiting to get approval.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, and that's what makes people, this industry is very young, but people like myself, we are the experts. We've been doing this and fighting through this, and people have been learning off of us, including the government. So, that's one reason why I feel like it's important for me to go out there and talk about this, and educate people and give them a little leg up for things I didn't have a clue on. No one told me. I was, one of the first. Like I said, everyone's sitting around watching me, waiting to see if we're going to get arrested. So, that's why I get on podcasts like yours. That's why I go out there and speak about this. I don't get paid to do this. It's really just me trying to go out there and give someone else that information that I never got.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important to do that work. And I'm just so grateful for people who are not only business owners, but activists like yourself that are helping other people step into the space and be successful. And when we are looking at success, what are your thoughts on social equity?
Well, I mean, it's extremely necessary. It's very difficult to get the right system in place. I know that some states are coming online trying to include social equity, but there's always someone trying to navigate around that or manipulate it. So it's tough, but it's necessary. It's fair. There should be programs in place to help people get into the industry, or to be a part of it indirectly, however it needs to happen. And so I think it's very important.
What are you seeing in Nevada around activity around social equity and creating that?
Well, the cannabis, Nevada's Cannabis Compliance Board, they developed a subcommittee for social equity, inclusion and diversity. And, I was able to be on that subcommittee. I'm an advisory member of that board as well. And I think it's important that they start putting people at the table, getting, activists like myself, people who are involved in change and policy and the industry as well. They can speak on it. They experienced it. They know firsthand what this takes. So Nevada, although we still have a long way to go, and in creating programs and giving, applying money and tax money to these programs and things of that nature, there's a long way to go. Yeah. But, they're at least starting that process by doing things like they've done and creating those subcommittees, putting people like myself in those committees to advise the board on the direction of social equity and inclusion.
Yeah. When I was co-chair of the legalization task force in San Francisco, and that was when we first started having the conversations about social equity, one of the things that kind of got to me was the initial conversations were about creating job opportunities. And I was like, well, that's all very well and good because not everybody wants to own a business, but what are we doing to help people start their businesses? And how do we close some of these loopholes that we know will happen when we set up the structure for our social equity programs? And we did see that. We saw people that, were social equity operators. They wanted to get going. There were larger companies that were like, well, we'll partner with you on it. And then that equity partner was ending up having a very small percentage or say in the business. And it seems like we're starting to kind of tighten up on that so that people aren't getting taken advantage of. But I still feel like the barrier to entry is still incredibly high. And it's just,
Yeah.
and people wonder why the traditional market's flourishing. It's like, well, you have these, amazing cultivators and entrepreneurs that don't want to deal with this bullshit.
Yeah. No, exactly. No, I think you're absolutely correct. You know, and once again, it's totally necessary, but it definitely has a lot of work still to be done in that area to make sure that we get people not only, like I said, because not everyone should be a business owner. Let's just keep it real.
Right.
Like, you might be a good baker, doesn't mean you should own a bakery. And that's another thing. But I think creating opportunity, also investing money into education of this industry in other areas, because there's every industry needs support businesses. Like, we all talk about all the different things that we need as a company to just be successful in our own dispensaries, and that's marketing and graphic design and websites and packaging. And there's so much other areas that people can get into that still are attached to the industry, but you don't have to go through the bullshit. So, just educating people on those things as well and giving them the opportunity to see this as a whole.
Yeah. Did you ever think you'd see the day where a young person would get excited about getting an education in supply chain management?
Yeah, exactly. But the young people don't even know to think outside the box that way. They only see what's in front of them and not what other areas can be an opportunity for them and be less risky. So I think just creating those type of programs and education and really, opening it up will help.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like as we evolve, it's like we're getting the education more dialed in and getting people more set for success, not only with cannabis education, but, business savvy and just really like, I see a lot of, especially in California here, there are a lot of really great activists that are, working to, it's like somebody was saying that it's not that social equity doesn't work. It's that we have to, make adjustments and have our voices heard and really get active so that it becomes what it needs to be. But these people are also amazing mentors towards people who are getting in the industry. And I feel like the more people who are involved and the more people who are active, and also, bringing up, the point where we're talking to policymakers and saying, hey, we can't be forgotten. We vote. We use cannabis. We contribute to society and we vote. So support us. Create, better policies so that we're, doing exactly what we said we were going to do, which was the legalization of cannabis was going to be a huge start in lowering incarcerations of folks.
Absolutely, totally agree.
So I was looking at your bio and I noticed that you are doing work with Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, I've been on that board since about 2017. Doctors for Cannabis Regulations is a global voice for physicians or health professionals or anyone just really that cares about cannabis. You don't have to be a medical professional, but it's, from that perspective of education, advocacy efforts, and through, doctors and people in the medical field that can speak on this, that really want to help improve public health and social justice and customer, protection of the plant. And so we work to support a lot of organizations on cannabis prohibition and just legalizing and regulating this properly and making it safe to consume. And so a lot of our efforts are talking to lawmakers and medical and organizations and really working together to try to make those changes.
Mm-hmm. When we're talking about, too, keeping people safe, creating safe product, testing really comes into play. Because I know, like, one of the things, like, we talk about, oh, well, nobody's ever died from taking too much cannabis, but we have seen fatalities with adulterated products. We've also seen where, people with a compromised immune system, if it's extreme, they can die from something as simple as a yeast infection. So if they're using product that's, has mold, mildew, or fungus in it, that can be really impactful or even fatal for them. What are you seeing as far as testing standards in Nevada, and are there any things that you'd like to see improved upon or change?
No, like I said, we're very, because we're so highly regulated out here, they were very adamant about everything going through testing labs and being very strict about that, and how they measure, the potency and how they measure and look at the toxins and different things like that. So I think, the testing is, like you said, is very important. I feel like they do a pretty good job here in Nevada with that. Once again, sometimes we feel like we're over-regulated. If anything is slightly off, and also in the industry, sometimes one lab, they had to kind of get this under wraps because one lab might test your product and have a different outcome than another lab. And so they kind of had to go in and really focus on lab testing and get them straight. Once again, learning on your back, because when that happens, you get two different test results, and you're spending a lot of money for this, and it costs us money, and you don't know who's correct, and then you got to go and get rid of product that's not testing appropriately, and in one lab it is, in one lab it is. So there is a big learning curve there too as well. But like I said, I see things really moved in the right direction, still working on it, but still moving in the right direction for us. And as we've gone through this, once again, we've just been through a lot of obstacles, just people trying to get this system right. But unfortunately, the dispensary owners and people in the industry or cannabis, our cultivation owners, we suffer because they're learning on your back. But we see it always constantly improving, and they're always working on it, looking at it. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah,
I think they're going to do it. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's an interesting thing. That's whenever somebody will ask what I like about my work the most, especially as an educator. It's it can be a hardship, but it's also an exciting thing in a way, is that we are constantly learning. Like you're never, if somebody ever refers to me as an expert, I'm like, there are no experts. Like we're constantly like learning things and being disproved on things that we thought were truths before. And I think it's a really invigorating and fascinating part of our work. And I love that. And I'm really excited to see like when we actually, like, what does standardized calibration of testing machines look like? How is that going to pan out? But just that, being on the forefront of what we're doing in the early years, because even though this has been going on for some time, in this grand scheme of things, it's been a very short blip on the timeline of, cannabis. And I wonder, like, what we're going to be seeing 20 years from now, and I'm sure it's gonna take my breath away, because when I started working, we weren't even talking about CBD back then. It was like when CBD products came on the market, we could barely give them away, even though those of us who are working, in the dispensaries were like, oh wow, it does this and this, and then people all of a sudden caught on to the wave, and then you couldn't keep things in, enough in, because it was out, because people they're still coming up to speed with like cultivation of CBD rich cultivars, because it just changed so quickly. Like the fluctuations that we have in interest in the market are really fascinating. It's like there'll be a hot cannabinoid and everybody will go towards that, and then people are like scrambling to make that happen. But it's just like the trends and the different things that we're learning and the new products and I don't know if you remember this, but like back in the day, like drinks were disgusting. and
Yes.
now they're so
Yes.
wonderful. It's
I know, right?
yeah, it's
No,
amazing
it's
to
true.
see.
No, and it, like you said, it evolves in dog years. Like I feel like, like you said, 2014, 15, that's just right around the corner. But in that time frame, we've learned and grown and evolved so fast and quickly. Just it will be, and I agree. 20 years from now, it's going to blow our minds. When we look back at this, especially being some of the first people in here dealing with the obstacles we had to, and seeing all the changes, it's going to be incredible. But it's going to change dramatically too when things get descheduled or it becomes federally legal. And so I think it'll move a lot faster when that happens too. You'll see a lot of things changing and happening. So it's very interesting. It's really cool to be on the forefront of it all. And like you said, we maybe could be considered experts, but we are not. We're still learning constantly. It's always evolving. And I'm just glad to be a part of it.
Well, and to have a steady and informed voice like yours, being able to talk to people and help direct them on the path to, safe, successful business consumption. We're looking at, like, especially, where you are, you get, visitors from all over the world that, may not have access to it otherwise. And they're like, oh, let's do it. And then you're in Vegas, and there's, I've been there. There's a lot of lights, a lot of activity, and that can be a beautiful thing for somebody first trying cannabis, and for somebody who maybe overshoots what they should have taken. It's like, even though you're safe, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's fun, and that's got to be. I'm wondering, like, some of the, especially, like, I love the fact that there are these conversations, and there seems to be much more headway with, like, the consumption lounges in Nevada than there was before. Because I remember seeing a lot of my colleagues lamenting about, yeah, we've got it, but when people visit, where can they actually use it? It's really frustrating. So, kudos to you with your work with policy and just creating that safe container for people to be able to have the conversations and also partake.
Yeah, no, yeah, we're definitely excited about the lounges as well. But at the same time, like you said, it's still a lot of obstacles people, have to overcome in that space, including not being able to be on the strip or near the strip. And like you said, people come from all over here. And one thing I can say about our location, we really cater to locals. That's our biggest, that's who we serve. We're not anywhere near the strip. We really focus on the community, and so I feel like lounge wise we'll be really just doing the same. We won't really have a business plan that focuses on any tourist at all, and that was one of the things we kind of stood away from. We didn't want to compete in that area, and it's worked for us. Mm-hmm. So, I can see us doing the same thing for the lounges, but we definitely, it will be interesting to see how that takes shape.
Yeah. Well, when you were saying that, I was thinking about, during the pandemic, businesses that were more focused around locals, I think tended to thrive more than ones that were depending on tourist traffic.
Yeah, exactly. And, a lot of those, I'm still the same original owners. We are small. We like to consider ourselves like the Trader Joe's or the Cheers of the industry.
I love that.
Yeah, we know everybody's name. We're a community, and we compete. We're still one of the contenders out here in town, but we stayed very true to our focus. We did not want to focus on one consumer that comes in and pops in and you'll never see them again. And so we really focused on that with everything we did, even including looking for our location and setting up shop. And so, once again, it worked for us. We also stayed true and connected to the community. We're probably the only original owners. There's only a few, original owners. Most of these companies have been bought out by big corporations, things like that. And they have, or they have 15 to 20 different investors. So, we kind of stayed true to all of that, and stayed close to the ground, focused on the patients as well, never lost sight of how this helps medically. And it really, to me, speaks to our success.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one thing that I think people who aren't immersed in it don't understand is what a personal and emotional thing cannabis is for people. And especially like, for me, when I was working in a dispensary, there were some people who were really critically ill, and we were basically their community, and the only interaction that they really had with the outside world would be when they came to see us. And we were in many ways, their community, the support system. I used to say, being behind the bar is like being like, part therapist and, to a certain extent, almost pharmacist. You're trying to you're making recommendations, but you're not practicing medicine, but people are looking to you for advice. And it's like, how do you hold space for somebody who might be coming in on the worst day of their lives, and being that, support for them. We would always, when I would do trainings with staff, we'd always have really real conversations about compassion burnout. It can be really hard. And when you have regular community members coming in, like regulars, it's like you have this emotional attachment to them. And especially when people are critically ill. And like for me, I run a compassion program, getting free medicine to the critically ill. And every time it never gets easier when somebody dies.
Right. No. No, I agree. And we as well do compassion type programs.
That's awesome.
I have a medical clinic, a nonprofit medical clinic, and we help the underinsured population and underserved population with not only primary medical care, but also now behavioral health and substance abuse. And it's amazing when you see, all these things helping people and them having these options. And like you said, when they would come into the dispensary and that they can now stop taking their anti-anxiety medication because, they are now on cannabis and things, and this really saved them or changed them, or someone coming in, they used to limp and now they don't. I mean, it really does something to you to be able to see that change and be a part of it. So it does, like you said, there's burnout, there's compassion, burnout. Like we get that all the time in our workplace as far as like wellness of our own employees, because you're so invested in people's personal journey and helping them. To me, I come from a nonprofit space as well, and you have to really care to be in that space, because as we all know, there's no money in nonprofit.
It's true.
You do this for money. And so to me, the right mentality, I know that this is not, the right mentality for most people, but because most people get into the cannabis space just for the money. But really, if you keep that true compassion piece in your mind and look at it like that, like I do look at my nonprofit work, it truly does. It changes lives, it helps people, and you fight harder for that, because the money will come if you have the true intentions of what this does and how it helps in connecting to those people and staying connected, and to the compassion of what this does to the people, and how it helps. So I just feel like taking that approach has always worked for us, and myself personally, and you help the community, you support them, and they're going to support you back. And that's kind of been our formula.
I feel like it's an opportunity to change the way we do business. I mean, we have, like you said, there are a lot of people that are coming into it looking at just the revenue portion of it, but that's kind of soulless. I mean, that isn't what creates a successful environment. And I think there are a lot of people that are still involved, like yourself, who have not forgotten the heart of why it is that you're doing what you're doing. And I think the community using, your revenue for community support and doing all this stuff is a recipe for abundance in the long run. If we're looking at the long game and supporting our communities and giving back, it only comes back to us. And that's not the reason we do it, but it's also what makes it sustainable. When we're looking at the medical side, and this is the one thing that always, it interests me and irritates me. We have recreational now, or as I like to refer to as adult use. There's no need for medical. Medical's going away. But the one thing that I noticed when we went into legalization here in California was that it wasn't a free-for-all. It wasn't like, there's nothing wrong with getting high, and people do that for the enjoyment of the act itself and the feeling. But what I saw was that more people were actually coming in and saying, hey, now I don't have to talk to my doctor and have that awkward conversation. I'd like to see what it does for sleep because I have a friend that's helped them, or I'm feeling stressed out and I need something, to help me with that. And New York, it looks like they're trying to get it so that insurance will cover medical cannabis. And that made me feel very hopeful that we can use that to influence other states so that not only will the conversation around medical cannabis and supporting the patients not go away, because it can't, it's super important, but maybe we'll be able to create better access through pressuring the insurance companies to actually support it. I know like in the Netherlands years ago, they had some of their insurance programs did cover medical cannabis, and just a few years ago they changed that, which worried me because you see these trends in other countries and you wonder what's going to bleed over to ours. But New York's work around that gives me hope that of course I think the compassion programs not only should still exist, but they should grow. We should be seeing those in every state because getting sick is incredibly expensive. And if you've been sick for a really long time, it's debilitating in itself, not only emotionally, but to not be able to get what you need. But to think about maybe having that, and also people not having to worry so much about affording what it is that they need to use to create relief instead of having to turn to a pharmaceutical that has harmful side effects for them. I just makes me so incredibly happy. And it's when I hear that, I'm like, what can I do to help? What can I do to make sure that we push this through and influence or as I like to say, guilt, policymakers into actually looking at this and doing something about it.
Yeah, same here. And I'd like to see more people looking at pharmacists and pharmacies, and how they can engage in helping patients. Not necessarily dispensing there or anything, but if it being more like a prescription, and also insurance companies covering this and things like that. I'm not going to say that pharmaceutical medication is unnecessary. It definitely is for
absolutely.
people who need pharmaceutical drugs for different diseases and things. Do not get off of that if you need it, if it's saving your life. But they need the options, because cannabis can do so many things. It can help and alleviate some of that. And the sooner insurance companies and things get involved in that, and kind of grasp onto that concept, it saves money in the long run. It saves the money eventually. If someone can't sleep, and you can take something natural that'll help you sleep, that won't cause more health issues down the line that insurance has to cover for later, you would think it's a no-brainer. So hopefully eventually they kind of all get on board. But once again, I think all these conversations will be even more important when it hopefully gets federally legalized across the nation.
Yeah, I really appreciate your balanced approach to it, because you're right. There is, even though I was saying, sometimes people, they are able to not use pharmaceuticals that have some harmful side effects. It is really essential that we have the conversation that cannabis isn't the panacea, that a lot of people would like to push it forward, as we still need traditional allopathic medicine and pharmaceuticals for our health and our well-being. Kema, we just almost went to an hour.
Man, and right, I feel like I was talking to my best friend on the phone call. Like, this was so natural. So I thank you for that.
Oh, no.
But
I'm really,
time just flew.
Yeah, I love our conversation, and I feel like we have future conversations that are going to happen.
Exactly. Right. Or we've been having them. So I thank you for that. It just was a very natural flow.
My pleasure. It's always so wonderful to talk to inspiring women like you in the industry. And I had so many more questions for you, but before we wrap it up, what are you excited about in your work and in the industry for the future? And then after that, I'll ask you the last question after you answer that.
Okay, yeah, no, I am excited about the lounges and what that can do, because that is going to help the barrier to entry for some people. I'm hopeful that with this, I'm a little disappointed that things haven't moved further along with this administration. So I'm hopeful that going forward, as new elections come around and we can start looking at, changes legislatively, and get this moving along, with more legalization and federal changes and banking access and things like that. But I am looking forward as well to, I'm excited about the social equity components in different states that are starting to really look at that piece and know it's important and not just be lip service that we've seen in the past. So those things excite me, and what could be the outcome of those changes.
Are there any projects in the future that you wanted to share with our listeners?
Well, I think once again, as we're trying to look at the lounges for ourselves, and what we want to do in that space, that's a project that we're kind of gearing ourselves up for. But we also have other licenses here in town that we're trying to get open with other partners as well. So I'm excited about that. And people, if they want to learn more about what I'm doing, they can go to KemaOgden.com. I have a website just so that I can keep people updated with different, things that I'm speaking about, different projects I'm working on, how to support the organizations I'm involved in, things like that. And so anyone interested can go to that website.
Are there ways to follow you on social media?
Yeah, same. My handle Instagram is Kema Ogden, at Kema Ogden, Facebook as well. So yeah, please follow along and support the organizations and the people out there really trying to fight for this, so that other people can be involved in it's a fair industry.
Kema, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. The work that you're doing is so incredibly impactful, especially being a leader in this space, as a woman, as a Black woman, as somebody who's fighting for not only, safe access for your patients, but also, safe access and entry for entrepreneurs getting into the space. We need to clone you.
Well, thank you. I wish I had a whole bunch of me's just so I can do more. I feel like there's so many people out there doing so much good work. I just tell your listeners, please support them, so that you don't have to be in those streets fighting for this, but support them so that they can,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I look forward to our future conversations. You're just, you're a delight to talk to, and you're just so, I totally got educated. And that's what it's all about, really. sharing information and learning from one another. And for those of you out there, please follow Kema on social media, check out her website, see what's going on, get involved. Even if you don't want to be on the ground floor, there are so many ways that you can get involved. It's time for our policymakers to understand that their views of people who use cannabis are outdated and don't serve them or their careers. It's time to let people know that you are a member of society, you give back, you're engaged, you use cannabis, and you vote. Please do that. Remember, Planted is twice a month. You can follow us on social media. We are Planted with Sarah Payan on Facebook. We are Planted with Sarah on Instagram and Twitter. You can listen to this podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. We are on Apple, Amazon, Google, Stitcher, TuneIn, Pandora, Spotify. And if you like an episode, or you're liking all the episodes, which is what I hope, share them with a friend and go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're liking, what you'd like to see, because this is for you. So until next time, it's a crazy world out there. Be good to each other, stay safe, and stay curious. Until next time, Sarah Payan signing out.